Chapter 125 Fire Soul. He swindled 3 lightning star diagram books and 3 fire star diagram books from Mrs. Tongyu's hands. Now, Mo Fan possessed a total of 7 intermediate magic books. This increased Mo Fan's confidence a lot. After all, primary magic and intermediate magic were incomparable. Just seeing the tyrannical power from back then, and its incredible ferocity. However, Mrs. Tongyue reminded Mo Fan that although the star diagram books were not rare for her, the vast majority of magicians who wanted to continue increasing their strength would definitely not excessively use this kind of auxiliary item. The star diagram books were, after all, an auxiliary. The more he used it, the more difficult it would be for him to control his stars. The stars were supposed to interact with their magicians. Using the star diagram books was equivalent to having someone else taking care of the stars, and thus, it would be harder for them to listen to you. Mrs. Tongyue recommended that Mo Fan stop using these star diagram books after this time. If there was a side effect, then he'd be the one losing out. After all, based on Mo Fan's current cultivation speed, it seemed like he would most likely reach a higher realm. After taking the star diagram books, Mo Fan dressed up like a normal backpacker as he began to tail the poor, yet vicious-looking villain. Mo Fan was actually feeling quite confused, as the person looked relatively handsome and elegant, so why would he do such an evil thing? After walking into a desolated field, Mo Fan found the man in the round hat standing in place. Furthermore, it looked like he was inspecting something. This was originally a very large field, and he would occasionally see a few farmers sitting in the shade, sighing. Normally, they'd be able to harvest their crops during autumn, but this time, it had dried up for some reason. How could they not feel aggrieved about this? "Uncle, do you remember when this place began to dry up?" The man in the hat, who had walked over to an old farmer, asked this courteously. "Around 10 days ago, just after my godforsaken child decided to go upstream to swim. I told him not to swim over there, and now, our crops have ended up absorbing his dirty water. Oh, after they went to the brook, they came back to tell me that the water of the pond had diminished by a lot. There wasn't enough to even swim. I reckon the water disappeared like magic from that day on," a farmer with a dirty tank top replied. "Oh, thank you. I'll go and take a look," the man with the hat said. "Youngster, I advise you not to go. I heard that the place's temperature was unusually high, it's like it began to boil up." "Don't worry." The man in the hat walked toward the dried riverbed according to the instructions of the old farmer, heading upstream. At this moment, Mo Fan awkwardly realized if he followed the person into the desolated area, he could easily be found out. After waiting for a while, Mo Fan ran up to the old farmer who'd had a conversation with the man in the hat. So he followed the brook upstream. Mo Fan secretly nodded to himself. Something is not right. Let's hurry up and follow him. The voice of a woman quietly appeared next to him. Mo Fan was startled. He turned his head around, only to realize it was Mrs. Tongyue. "Damn it, you think having a shadow spell is amazing? There's no need to be so scary and appear without notice. That person seems like he is also looking for the reason behind the dried-up brook," Mo Fan said to Mrs. Tongyue. Let's go. If I'm not mistaken, then there'll be more and more people gathering in this place," Mrs. Tongyue replied. When Mo Fan heard this, he was confused. He felt like this matter wasn't as simple as Mrs. Tongyue had made it out to be. After continuing, the water upstream described by the old farmer actually flowed down from the hills. After walking this road, it was clear there were no signs of moisture in this entire brook, and the vegetation surrounding the brook was visibly starting to wither. Why does this place look like this? It looks like it has been dried up for a month or two. If it was a drought, then I'm sure the news would have reported this when I was on the internet. Crap, this place has no signal. Damn it, of course a rural area doesn't have anything. Mo Fan looked down at his phone and couldn't help but complain. This shouldn't have anything to do with a natural drought, and I've never heard of Hangzhou being in a dry season in July. Let's continue following that person. I'm sure we'll find the answer soon, Mrs. Tongyue told him. Mo Fan nodded. As he was about to open his mouth, Mrs. Tongyue's jade-like hand suddenly covered his mouth. Mo Fan widened his eyes in shock, and he didn't have time to react before Mrs. Tongyue suddenly pulled him to hide in the shadows of a tree next to them. "Hide your aura." Mrs. Tongyue exhaled next to Mo Fan's ears, her breath turning into a captivating smell of the wind. Happiness came very suddenly. Mo Fan had no time to hide his own aura. He stood there, hiding with Mrs. Tong Yue and her incredible body behind the trees. As the warm wind attacked, the shadows of the trees began dancing. The two people who looked like they were French kissing by the trees began to turn hazy and gradually integrated with the shades of the trees before they completely disappeared. A strong dark aura flooded the surroundings. Mo Fan lowered his head and couldn't see his own body. He had to carefully look to see there was an outline of a person beneath the shadow of the tree. Mrs. Tongyu's shadow could not be seen. It was like there was no one there. However, the wonderful fragrance, as well as the glossy skin of her body, had all been sampled by Mo Fan. His concentration couldn't help but waver. While he was getting used to being inside the shadow, a few footsteps were heard from not too far away. It sounded like there were quite a few people. Mo Fan retracted his thoughts as he gazed over to the other side of the dried-up brook. A group of people appeared from between the trees, and they seemed to be hunter magicians based on their outfits. Hunter magicians often worked outside of the safety zones, and they would contend against magical beasts. Their equipment was all very exquisite. A glance was all that was needed to recognize what they were. Mo Fan was confused. Could it be that this matter had been noticed by the government, and they issued a bounty? There were hunters coming here to take care of it? Trust me, this place definitely has a fire soul. Those blockheads thought this place had dried up. That is far too funny. You are all very clear on how much a fire soul can be sold for. Let's take this chance when no one has noticed to grab the fire soul and then sell it. After that, we'll be rich, a man with a cowboy hairstyle at the very front declared. Panshong, you better not mess with us. We had to give up a bounty to come here. If there's nothing here then. HMPH, a man with a scarred face shot back. In my opinion, there is most likely a fire soul here. If it dried up, then this place wouldn't have shriveled up in such a short time. How does this place even look like Zhongnan? It simply looks like a desert closer to the northwest, the man with spectacles said. Alright, let's do our best to quickly locate the whereabouts of the fire soul. Ha ha ha, this time we'll really become rich. Panshong, we all know you're a fire magician. You better not refine the fire soul. Since the rest of us can't enjoy this thing, then it's better if we sell it and distribute the profit among us. Chapter 126 Dual Element is Burning Money. Fire Soul? Numerous question marks emerged within Mo Fan's head. This appears to be a concept that school doesn't teach. Mo Fan couldn't help but gaze toward the Mrs. Tong Yue who was extremely close to him. Mrs. Tong Yue has an extremely delicate oval face. Her eyes were bright, like electricity ran through them. Her tall nose seemed sexy, and her small, red mouth was fascinating. Her skin was fair, white, and ruddy, and despite her face being so close to him, he was still unable to find a flaw on her. Mrs. Tong Yue noticed Mo Fan's lecherous glint. She harshly glared at him and said, "If you were to blaspheme a teacher in the past, you'd be beaten to death." Sister Tong Yue, please, currently, it is you who's pressing me. Seducing a student in the past would result in being soaked in a pig basket. Mo Fan said. As Tong Yue saw that person leaving, she finally let go of Mo Fan. The second after she released Mo Fan, their figures once again emerged behind the trees. It appeared to be extremely strange. Tong Yue felt disinclined to blabber with Mo Fan. She knew that Mo Fan definitely did not know what a soul is. In that moment, she also began to dispel his doubt as a proper role model. The world produces elements. And these elements would also have different rankings depending on their environments. In some of the special areas, the elements are rather active, and as a result, it'd give birth to a fire soul. If this kind of fire soul was to be refined and absorbed by a fire magician, then the might of the fire magician's spells would increase by multiple times. Increase by multiple times? As Mo Fan heard this, he became excited. Mo Fan had already realized that no matter which cultivation you are at, the casted spells essentially still have the same might. For example, he is currently an intermediate magician. His speed in casting primary spells is extremely quick, but its power was the same as other primary magicians. The fire burst, rupture which Shu Dahuang casts is not much different than the one which Mo Fan casts. This became a big problem for Mo Fan. In the Xuanwan novels that he had read in the past, the other people's might would increase along with their cultivation. Mo Fan thought that the power of his spells would never increase. Who would have thought that the thing that'd allow him to increase his power would actually be in this place? Fire Soul. Magicians have to go through absorption and refining of the elemental seed produced by heaven and earth to increase his own magic power. Furthermore, if it increases the power by multiple times, does that mean it will be able to reach a power where fire burst, rupture is capable of directly killing those three-eyed magic wolf and colossal-eyed ape rat? The present Mofan's body doesn't have a stardust to store his mana anymore, but a nebula. Casting 10 or so primary magic for the current Mofan wouldn't fatigue him too much. Intermediate magic's ability in killing is indeed very strong. However, there's no way they'd be using intermediate magic to kill the smaller ones as well. That way, he'd be wasting too much mana and energy. The power of primary magic is obviously not on par with intermediate magic. However, the effects of the spells are something else. For example, lightning element's paralysis would be useful in any kind of battle. The most common kind of fire soul in the market would still reach up to 2 million, and there'd still be people fighting over it. I was wondering why this criminal would take a risk and wander about. It seems like he was drawn out by this fire soul. Mrs. Tang Yue came to understand the situation, and her ruddy mouth turned into a slight smile. 2 million, oh my god. That amount of money could get me a large villa in downtown Shanghai. Mofan subconsciously took a deep breath. This soul is even more precious than diamonds. I'm sorry, that still won't be enough. Tang Yue gave Mofan a despicable glance. Alright, the prices of real estate in Shanghai are just too excessive. However, a small fire soul's price can reach this kind of degree. This made Mofan feel very shocked. Furthermore, this thing could directly increase the power of fire magic. Not only would primary magic receive an increase in its power, but even the intermediate magic would as well. Just thinking about that unreasonable power of Fiery Fist. If the power of Fiery Fist would increase by double, then not only would it be able to directly kill those minion-class magical beasts, but even those warrior-class magical beasts wouldn't be able to resist it. Oh right, I remember that girl Mu Ningzhu had an innate something. Mofan suddenly thought of something as he quickly asked. It hadn't been long since Mofan had gotten here, so there was a lot of knowledge that he needed to replenish. Other than the special elemental seed produced by heaven and earth, there'd be some people from those noble and ancient families where they'd innately have a soul of some sort. These people would awaken a few years earlier than normal people, and their awakened element would be much stronger than others by a level. Mu Ningzhu should be an innate glass ice seed. It belongs to the strongest type of ice within the ice soul seeds. The power would be 2.5 times stronger than your normal ones. When someone like her uses ice spread, cover, she could freeze anyone in a certain area within 2 seconds. Against a group of magical beasts, she'd be able to have twice the effect with half the work. Pairing that with the earth wave of earth element that can slow the movement of magical beasts, it'd be able to freeze countless magical beasts. Mrs. Tang Yue patiently explained to Mofan. Mofan gasped. No wonder why that old scoundrel Mu Zhouyan thinks of Mu Ningzhu like a treasure, and why the entire Bo City referred to Mu Ningzhu as the #1 girl genius. This kind of innate talent that allowed her to be stronger than others by 2.5 times truly makes her sweep past her peers. Furthermore, this girl awakened her element a few years earlier than others. Her advantage was very clear. No wonder why she was directly recruited by Imperial Institute. Normal people indeed have no way to compete. Mofan whispered. Tang Yu's face revealed a smile as she said to Mofan, your innate gift is also tyrannical. You have one more element than others. If we were to compare, then your innate dual element would be much more favorable than Mu Ningzhu's. Element seed ranking could be increased through absorbing the seeds produced by heaven and earth. Having another one being produced is something you can discover but not sought for. Mrs. Tang Yue, since you're putting it like that, then I'm feeling better about myself. There are also cons. This is because you use more resources compared to your peers. If you can't increase your cultivation and lack resources, then you'll be no different than a useless person. In short, your innate talent burns money and resources. The corner of Mofan's mouth twitched. Mrs. Tang Yue, if you stop rubbing salt on my wounds, then we can still remain a happy student and teacher. The aspect of burning money is something Mofan has already experienced. When other people buy a star trail, they would at most spend around 50,000. When Mofan has to buy them, he'd need a fire type and a lightning type, making it 100,000 in total. Furthermore, if we were to think about it in form of soul seeds, Then he can't just get a fire soul seed, but it seems like he'd need to get a lightning type too. If a fire soul seed costs 2 million, then just what kind of level would that put a lightning type? Shit, this would mean I'd have to live in the rural area for the rest of my life. Chapter 127 The Oriole and the Fisherman. I suggest you rely on rich and influential power. They will provide you with their rich resources, that way you can secure a good future. Of course, in the future, you will need to follow their orders. After all, they would have given you countless resources. Mrs. Tang Yue recommended. Mrs. Tang Yue, you seem to have an extraordinary background. How about you provide for me and, in the future, I won't hesitate for you even in extreme dangers. Mo Fan said, You dare to sweet talk again. Tang Yu's face flushed bright red as she gave this perverted student a deadly glare. She understood the nasty meaning concealed beneath his words. Mo Fan didn't dare to be rash again. He still needed Mrs. Tang Yue for her help. It's better if he were to quit ahead, or else he'd be left behind. After the hunter magicians left, the two of them began to silently follow. They didn't dare to follow too closely. Mrs. Tang Yu's shadow spell was not very effective and could easily be discovered. Following the footsteps of these people, the teacher and the student had finally found the source of the river. The source of the river was intentionally stored, forming a small reservoir. The current reservoir had already dried up. There were even some dried fish bones lying within. How come there are so many people? This kind of news is indeed hard to hide. Tang Yue and Mo Fan were hiding and concurrently discovered that there were two groups at the small reservoir. One of the groups were the hunter magicians from before. Apart from these three guys, Pan Shang, the man with the scarred face, and the cowboy-styled man, there were another 7 comrades alongside them. At this moment, this troop of hunter magicians were looking as if they're facing the enemy as they stood on a spot near the hills. Another group looks as though they just arrived. There were a total of 4 men. Every one of them gives off a noble and virtuous impression, and in the face of 1,000 hunter magician squads, they hardly seemed fazed. Pan Shang, if you don't want to be begging in the streets of Hangzhou, then be a good boy and take your men away. The fire soul seed that we, the Dongfang family, have settled our eyes on will never be shared with others. One of the men, who was the head of the group, wore a traditional luxurious tang suit, stated. This man was very particular about his clothing. Even one strand of hair looked as if it were specially done. If he was wandering in the street, it'd be normal to think he'd attract the attention of numerous ladies. The Dongfang family? Mo Fan started to think to himself. Previously, from watching television and novels, there'd usually be a person with a surname like this, always so imperious. In groups, they'd be rude and cocky. Every time they spoke, they'd always begin with stating their family name first. It was like they were a part of the royal family. So it is the Dongfang family. These ill-mannered people are also aiming for the fire soul seed. The Dongfang family are famously known for their specialization in fire element. This rare opportunity happened to appear in Hangzhou, which is a part of their territory. There's no reason for them to let other people get it first. Tang Yue murmured to herself. Tang Yue herself was specialized in fire element, so she knew of these renowned fire element families within the country. They look like they're about to brawl, but the problem is, where is the hooded man? Mo Fan couldn't help but notice after seeing these two groups with their swords drawn. He must be hiding somewhere. He plans on having these two groups fight against each other while he snatches it away, Tang Yue said. What should we do? We'll wait until the end. No matter what happens this time, we'll take it down. Mrs. Tang Yue spoke, as her eyes showed signs of determination. While both of them were having a conversation, the 4 men from the Dongfang family had already began fighting against Pan Shang's hunter magicians. All 4 of them from the Dongfang family were all fire magicians. When those 4 began to brawl, a lump of blazing flame appeared within their palm. Mo Fan basically didn't see them having any preparation action for their primary level fire elemental flame burst, since they're all spelled and were very familiar with it. It seemed it was very convenient for them to cast primary magic. Damn, all 4 of them were intermediate magicians. The Dongfang family are really something special. The people that they sent out to fight for the fire soul seed are all intermediate magicians. If they were in Bo City, all of them would be famous. In the other group, those 10 hunter magicians don't look like they're weak either. The aura that Pan Shang, the Scarface man, and the cowboy-style man gives off were intermediate level. The other 7 magicians in the group were the elites from primary magician's level. 3rd level of primary magic elemental were cast within 3 seconds. This is a considerably top-notch group of hunter magicians. They probably have the ability to kill a general class magical beasts. We'll need to hide further away if we don't want to get affected. Mrs. Tang Yue pulled Mo Fan, gently hopped, hiding in between a big field of green shade. Magic felt like a flash. The vision was blurred, as if it went to a plain darkness. All the surroundings disappeared. When the vision was back again, Mo Fan was amazed that he had appeared under the shadow in another field of vine tree where it was 30 meters outward. His eyes were filled with shock and awe when looking at Mrs. Tang Yu's unknown ability. This is called Fleeing Shadow, a shadow elemental primary spell. It won't be long for you to learn this spell when you have awakened shadow element. Mrs. Tang Yue grinned with confidence, yet enchanting, making a teenager like Mo Fan feel admiration and reverence toward her. This kind of technique was strong and yet mysterious. As her charms emitted from her body, it was hard for the boys not to fall for her. On the other side, the Dongfang family and the hunter magicians were also engaged in an intense fight. The sound of the flame-burst explosion continuously roared throughout this small forest. The dried plants went up in flames due to the searing blaze from the magicians. Mo Fan watched closely. He realized these intermediate magicians who casted their magic first hadn't displayed their intermediate magic yet. If you think about it, an intermediate magic needs to control a total of 49 stars. When you finished drawing the star atlas, the enemy would have already cast a few primary magic onto you. Primary magic strength isn't as powerful as intermediate magic, but the releasing speed is much faster. You guys cover me. I'll let them have a taste of my fiery fist, said the handsome man who wore the traditional Tang clothing. It was obvious that the 4 had been paired often. The other 3 instantly stood into a triangle formation to protect the man in Tang suit clothing. The stars were connecting one by one, rapidly forming a star path. The bright star path crossed once again, evolving into a star atlas under the feet of the Tang suit man. The moment star atlas was formed, bright red flame was wrapped around the Tang suit man. It looked like a scorching soul who was searching for revenge. The heat around him was firing up, causing the air temperature to rise. It felt as if they were in a boiling cauldron. Fiery fist, exploding heavens. After seeing the Tang suit man casting his intermediate magic, the 3 men standing in front immediately evaded. The man roared and he gathered all the flames into his right hand. This stance, this posture, this feeling seemed all very familiar to Mo Fan. Chapter 128 Intermediate Level Battle. It was clear that the man wearing a Tang suit had been at the intermediate level for quite a while. The fluency of his casting was much more proficient than Mo Fan, and the most important thing was, the other person was using his own control to draw the star atlas. As the 3 people dispersed, a colossal fist of flames suddenly rumbled down from the heavens. The small mountain ridge seemed unable to endure the power of the flames as it began to tremble fiercely. The heat became increasingly violent. Some of the surrounding trees quickly snapped off, and the treetops were so bent that it would have reached the ground. As the colossal fist of flames barged in, the hunter magicians began to scatter in fear, leaving only the cowboy standing there. There was no sign of him evading the spell. His eyes even revealed a bit of disdain. Rock barrier, stone range. Cowboy man yelled out, his 2 hands beginning to push out. Within the tongue of the flame, you could see a rock wall emerging. It formed into a rugged barrier of massive rocks. The rugged wall of stones looked like a shield that protected the people inside it, so thick that nothing could break into it. The colossal fist of flames that exploded at the top of the mountain actually left behind an imprint, but the waves of flames could only flow out into the surrounding area as they followed the stone barrier. Mo Fan gaped as he watched this scene. Mo Fan knew the power of Fiery Fist. The strongest part of Fiery Fist was the very center, which was able to burn buildings into ash. The attack power was enough to destroy an entire bungalow. However, when the incredible might of Fiery Fist smashed into the stone wall, it had actually been blocked. The cowboy man who was standing up against the Fiery Fist was unharmed, and so were the rest of the people behind him. Intermediate Rock Spell, Rock Barrier. The formerly strongest defensive spell of intermediate level. Tang Yue was very suitable to be a teacher, immediately explaining to Mo Fan the unknown information of the intermediate realm. Impressive, Mo Fan exclaimed. At the primary level, everyone only possessed a single spell. Thus, in a magic duel, it'd be each one taking turns to attack. In the intermediate level, everyone possessed 4 spells. A duel between magicians became a battle of tricks, with tactics of attacking and defending. Although the hunter-magician squad wasn't born famous, their matchup was incredibly reasonable. After Cowboy Man finished his defensive tactics, the man with scars on his face also finished casting his wind intermediate magic from beneath the rocks. Wind trail, tornado. In an instant, the reservoir within the mountain range felt as though www. A gale suddenly erupted. The dry and warm air was quickly blown away by the evil wind. The people who were standing by the small reservoir were clearly feeling the air within 100 meters of their surroundings frantically flowing into a designated area. The streams of air congested into the most constrained point of the air, causing it to slowly swirl around and build up into a frightening tornado. The tornado spun the dust into itself as it formed into a hazy yellow dragon extending across the sky. Even the trees in the surroundings were unable to endure the strength of the wind, and were nearly pulled into the tornado. As the frenzied winds blew into his face, they began to hurt a bit. Mo Fan was no longer able to clearly see the situation by the small water reservoir. All he could see was that wind trail, tornado that was like a vicious monster, turning the entire place upside down. Mo Fan had experienced the intermediate magic of wind element, and seeing it again this time made his heart surge once more. Compared to the primary level wind track, the intermediate wind spell was like a Tyrannosaurus. The destructive power was incredibly frightening. After the tornado passed by, the small reservoir had changed in form. The bent trees were bent, the collapsed had collapsed, and stones were everywhere. In the center of the chaos were precisely the 4 magicians from the Dongfang family. It seemed like they had used some kind of magic tool to defend themselves, as they weren't spun up into the air. If not, they wouldn't even have half of their life remaining if they had fallen from such a height. Although the 4 did defend themselves against the spell, their appearances showed they were in a difficult situation. The man who was wearing a tang suit seemed to have some anger revealed on his face. Both of the sides were burning with rage, and the magicians were no longer cautiously using their intermediate spells. Mo Fan and Tong Yue specifically retreated over 50 paces in order to avoid the crossfire. The fight continued for 10 minutes, and magic tools were brought out as well. Ultimately, the man wearing the tang suit used a death strike magical tool to cut down the scarred man's rock shield. The hunter-magician squad retreated in shock. Once their defense was taken away, the group of hunter-magicians who needed a whole team to compete were completely overwhelmed by the 4 intermediate magicians. Today, I will give your hunter union some face. If you don't get out now, then I will burn all of you into ashes. When the enforcement team comes, they won't be able to find a single trace of you. The man in tang suit yelled out angrily, and a golden ball of flame emerged from his hand. Shang Pan and his people were incredibly reluctant, but they had no ability to stand up for themselves. It wasn't that their skills were not on par, it was the fact that these family members just had way too much magical equipment on them. With great difficulty, they were able to suppress their opponents in terms of skills, but they ended up being easily defeated by the magic tools. At this time, the difference between an influential family and a grassroots magician became very clear. "We'll go." Shang Pan clenched his teeth as he carried his teammate who had been knocked unconscious. What they could rejoice about is that no one had died. The truth is, the people from the Dongfang family were completely capable of killing them right now. However, they chose not to do so due to potential repercussions from the court association. Magicians fighting over treasures in the outside world was a common occurrence. Magicians who had reached a higher realm most likely had their hands stained with the blood of their comrades. The hunter magicians believed their own lives were more important than the fire soul seed. Their group quickly retreated. They did not linger around this place as they seemed to be completely out of energy. The 4 people from the Dongfang family let out long breaths, finally relaxing after seeing the hunter magicians retreat. "Shit, they even dared to mess with us. I reckon our loss was quite big as well. My nebula is nearly exhausted," the handsome, spiky-haired man cursed out. "Yeah, it was thanks to what Brother Jun said, directly scare them away." The face of Tang Suit Man hadn't relaxed. Those hunter magicians usually fought against magical beasts. They were more powerful than the intermediate magicians who usually stayed within the city. Thankfully, He had brought these 3 people who could be considered to be elites within the family, or else he would have died here. The people from the Hunter Union were indeed not people they could easily provoke.